It is 2026, and for the past 6 years I've been riding KTM 1290 Super Adventure motorcycles. Initially the S model and then 3 R models. I sold my last KTM last year, and the next motorcycle will not be a KTM. What's up my biker friend, and welcome back to another video. This is going to be a little different video. I've done tons of videos on sort of gear and bikes over the past year since I've started this YouTube channel. And at the center of that was always my KTMs, my 1290 Super Adventure S and then later the R model. They were basically my companions for the past 6 years. Now in this year, in 2026, I will not be buying another KTM. And in this video, I'm going to go into the reasons why that is and tell you about sort of the conditions that have changed for me and why I'm going with a different brand this year. And of course, I'm going to tell you what bike I'm going to get for the 2026 season, so stay tuned. So before we start getting to the reason, just let me give you a quick history of the motorcycles I've owned so far and that I've ridden so far. I got my motorcycle license when I was 19, so relatively young. I didn't do much riding back then, but I did have a couple of motorcycles. And the one that I rode the most was actually a KTM. It was a 600cc single cylinder enduro motocross bike, and it was an older used bike. And the reason why I got it is because I thought as a novice or beginner rider, this bike could handle a beating, and drop over and fall over without falling apart. And I don't think I ever dropped the bike. And then I had a very brief moment where I had a Yamaha bike. But then the whole motorcycle thing kind of faded into the background. Not until, a few years ago, well, quite a few years ago now. But then I got back into motorcycle riding again. And I had, for 3 years, Harley Davidsons. I had a Softail Deluxe for 2 years. My first motorcycle, a nice blue, I don't know if I find a photo for it. A blue Softail Deluxe, and then I switched to another Harley Davidson for the 3rd year. It was a black Softail Deluxe, a little younger, different setup, different design, before I got into adventure motorcycle riding, or more road-focused motorcycles. And I had my first 1200 GS motorcycle, my first BMW for 2 years, and then came 4 KTMs after that. And that brings us to today, where sort of the story of KTM, at least for now, comes to an end. If you had to boil down the reason why I'm moving away from KTM, it does go back to the initial bankruptcy that they filed in 2024. There are several issues, but they kind of go back to that point in time. Now, if you guys remember, in the end of 2024, KTM showed up at EICMA. EICMA is one of the most important motorcycle convention. All the manufacturers go there to Milan, showing off their motorcycles. Also manufacturers that don't even sell in Europe, they're there presenting their products, and KTM came out guns blazing. They had so many new models that they were showing the world, lots of innovation, lots of cool stuff coming up. And then not even a month later, they filed for bankruptcy. So of course that shook up the entire year of 2025. It shook up all the people that KTM owed money to, because they only got a part of the money, and there were companies, I'm sure, that do not exist today anymore, and no one talks about them because they're too small that anyone would care. There's a lot of jobs that got lost, ownership changed, well, at least the proportion of ownership changed, because Bajaj, who now owns the majority part of KTM, was a 50% owner before, and I think they have a 75% stake in KTM now. So a lot of things happened. Production stopped for quite some time, and then when they picked up production again, it was a very slow start, because all those companies that delivered parts to KTM, parts of them weren't there anymore, and others, I'm sure, weren't very willing to extend a long credit line to KTM because they didn't get paid the money that they wanted. So there was a lot of upheaval that goes all the way to the dealerships as well. The few times I set foot in the dealerships, they didn't have any new motorcycles to sell. So they stayed pretty much empty, and I know some dealers have closed last year. Actually, the dealership that I went to for my last service before I sold the bike last year, in the northern part of Munich, they closed down 2 weeks after I had my bike in service there. Not sure how that is for the rest of Europe or Germany, but it had large ripple effects. Now that in itself isn't a reason to step away from KTM, but the actual reasons for me, because my situation has changed as well. This hobby of motorcycle riding that became a passion is now a full-time business for me. So I need certain things to be reliable. And one of the key issues is having parts supply being reliable. It was quite difficult and still is to this day, is to get certain parts from KTM. Depending on what breaks on your bike, it may take weeks or months before you get replacement parts. Now I have a partner that I work with for my guided tours and the self-guided tours that supplies the motorcycles. He has a motorcycle rental company. He started his rental company with KTM bikes. And he had quite a few KTMs in his fleet still last year. And to give you an example, he had one 1290 where the starter switch was broken. It's not a big deal. It's a part you can buy, put back on the bike. But the lead time was 2 months to get the replacement part. Now, when you think about the rental season is about 5 months in the middle of Europe, 5 months to make enough money renting out motorcycles. And 2 months of that, you have a motorcycle that you can't operate. Now, luckily, he had a friend that had a similar bike that gave him the part. But these kind of show the issues that you can have if, motorcycle riding or renting out bikes becomes sort of your source of income. That can't really happen. That's still the case to this day. The second reason that goes in with it, availability of new bikes in general. I'm not even sure I can buy a 1390 right now, Super Adventure. I know if they've been shown, the earliest they were shown was end of 24. The 1390 Super Adventure, and I know you see a few tests and people riding the bikes, but I don't think you can buy the bikes at the moment. And it would be too late anyway. We're well into the end of March at the moment. I pulled the trigger on my new bike in January, and I'm still waiting for it. So that would have been way too late. And that brings me to the third part, which is also quite important. Also, with the situation for me changing a little bit. But even before that, I was definitely someone that was riding well above, let's say, the average of riders when it comes to the kilometers that I ride in a year. And typically I would swap out bikes between 1.5 to 2 years. And typically I would have that point in time when I would sell a bike around the 40,000 kilometer mark. Sometimes it was a bit more, sometimes a bit less, but around the 40,000 kilometer mark. Not because the bikes are bad, but they're still good enough for someone else to enjoy them. And they still hold a certain value, I thought, at least. And so that was sort of the magic mark to sell the bike and then buy a new bike. Now, with me riding closer to 40,000 a year, I will be turning over bikes almost every year. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep the bike for 2 years and then put 80,000 kilometers on it, because at that point, when you have so many kilometers on it, there's only so much you can get out of the bike. Depends on the bike that you're using. So let's think I'm turning over bikes once a year. And the issue that I have was the bike that I sold, I had it for pretty much a year. And looking at the value depreciation that I got from selling it, it was more than 10,000 euros if I had paid full list price. Now, I didn't pay list price, so it kind of dampened that a little bit. But of course, if I have to buy a bike every year, and I can't really choose the point in time, I have to buy the bikes in the winter time to get ready for the season. So if I'm buying near retail price and the value depreciation is almost 10 grand, that is way too much for me for sort of a growing business to afford sort of losing that much money just on the value depreciation. Now, there's other motorcycle manufacturers that have less of a problem like that. But for KTM, especially on the large or the small bikes, that's one of the key reasons why I had to look elsewhere. Now, before we get into what the new bike is, it is very similar to what Stefan, my partner, is doing at the moment. He's phasing out all the motorcycles for the same reasons. Part supply, value depreciation is a very big reason. And of course, availability. It's really hard to get the bikes at the moment. So he's phased out all the KTMs. As of last year, they're all sold off now. So basically, we were in the same position when it comes to that. Alrighty, without further ado, what did I get? So, okay, to keep it simple, I am going back to BMW. I had a BMW, the 1200 GS. It was a great motorcycle, and it was my sort of the start of traveling, like proper traveling with the motorcycle was a BMW. And of course, Stefan, his entire fleet will now be BMW for the mentioned reasons that he had. So, focusing on a single brand makes things a lot easier. Of course, he has more buying power, buying more of the same brand. He usually stocks all the parts. He had the parts for the KTM, but we won't have parts for the KTM anymore this year. So having sort of tires and spare parts in his locations means I have access to all of that. It helps me with the servicing. Sometimes between tours, I have only 24 hours or 48 hours to jump onto the next tour. So if I need an oil change or a new set of tires, it makes life a lot easier for me to have it all there. Also, I won't be dependent on dealerships anymore to provide the service because Stefan does all his service himself. He can service all the motorcycles, and I'm basically locked in there. I have people that can help me, and I can do the service myself. Back in the days, the reason why I went to the dealerships is to maintain the warranty. Some of the bikes have 2-year warranty. The latest models I had, they had extended warranties of 4 years. In order to maintain that warranty, you have to bring the bikes into service. After a certain amount of mileage on the bikes or after a year, you have to bring the bikes into service. And sometimes it would take 6, 8, or even more weeks in order to get an appointment with the dealerships. And then you have to bring the bike there, and it takes a few days before you get it back. So that part of the logistics is something I don't have to deal with now with going with BMW. The type of bike I'm getting is the 1300 GS. I was going between the GS or the Adventure. I actually haven't really ridden the Adventure much, but at the moment I'm going for the GS. I had an extended test ride in Spain and Portugal last year, where we were scouting Andalusia and Portugal. And I had ridden that bike before. It's not a completely new bike to me, but for such an extended period of time, I was able to ride it and kind of see what I like and dislike about it. And I'll do a video. It's not all roses with the BMW, but it is a great motorcycle. So when people ask me, what is a great motorcycle to ride a tour in Europe, the BMW 1300 GS is a very good fit for most people. That is also what most people want to ride when they come to Stefan and ride my tours. The 1300 is usually a good motorcycle for people to ride. This wasn't an easy decision. As much as I like the BMW, my heart is still likes the KTM. So it was just the excitement of the bike and how the KTMs ride, I would have gone with the KTM. But with all those reasons, those commercial reasons, the servicing reasons, spare parts, it's a sort of common sense decision. Also, with everyone else riding with me, we'll be riding on the same brand, on the same bikes. It makes things a lot easier. I bring the right tool set. I can bring certain spare parts. If something happens, shift lever breaks or something, I can bring these parts. So just the logistics of that will be much, much easier. Now, I haven't done extensive riding, and I'm sure I'll do a video on that as well when I keep riding the 1300 to see how it is after a full season, after putting, 30, 40,000 kilometers on it, to see how it goes. But for the moment, I'm quite excited to get the bike. It is the trophy edition that I'm getting. So I'm getting a trophy edition. I get the sort of sports or higher suspension, a higher seat in it. So the seating height will be very close to my 1200 Super Adventure R. I had a rider with me last year on the ACT Italy. He had basically similar specs, and he let me ride it for a little bit. And that's actually a pretty good fit. Having a bit higher off the ground now. It's a white bike. So coming from a black to a white bike, I'm quite excited. And the other thing I'm super excited about is I've got a nice care package from Lone Rider. They sent me 5 big boxes of accessory and extra parts that I can put on the motorcycle, because now I'm switching from one brand to the next. So I'll bring my lights back. I will have a full crash protection, a new sort of luggage setup. For the first time, I'll be trying out hard panniers. That's going to be quite interesting. So I'm really itching to put all that stuff on the bike. And hopefully in the next few weeks, I'll get the motorcycle. Anyways, that's it for the video. If you have questions or comments, put them in the comment section. There will be more on this topic, on the topic of the BMW, probably a comparison as well to see how these bikes stack up. But we're starting 2026, and I'm excited to ride a BMW. See you soon.